Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of You Gotta Act, a podcast about actors and acting. Today, we have a returning guest in the shape of my sister, Elena Lazic.
Hello.
Hello, welcome back.
Thank you for having me back.
No problem. So if people want to know more about you, beyond the fact that you are obviously my sister, they can check out the episode you first appeared on, which is the Halloween episode where we talked about serial killers in films, free serial killers. And today you're back to talk about an actor that is connected to another actor we talked about on the show. And so you picked Robert Pattinson.
That's right.
So when did you first become intrigued by Pattinson or Patz?
Our Patz. I don't know when I first became intrigued with him. I think it's like most people, he just suddenly started appearing in films that you wouldn't necessarily expect him to appear in. So of course, I think I sort of first really became aware of him with Twilight. So that was 2008. And then I was like, oh, it's the guy from the Goblet of Fire from 2005, the Harry Potter movie. But then he was the Twilight guy. And then he suddenly started making these sort of quite out there films, like sort of almost some of them art house movies. And that's when I was like, oh, I should probably like consider him in a different way than I might have as just this star from like a teen movie. Because I have to admit, I wasn't like one of the hardcore Pattinson fans when Twilight happened. I think Twilight, I was a bit too old maybe in 2008. Was I was, yeah, I mean, I was 15. I guess I could have been into it, but I just wasn't.
That's kind of the target audience, but
probably yeah, but I don't know. I mean, maybe more like 12 or something. I don't know. I thought it was like cringe and horrible, and I was like, no, I'm not watching that, whatever. And big surprise, I rewatched the film for this, and I thought it was really good. And I was like, oh, I wish I had been like on the bandwagon when I was little. I had such a good time. I'd been so happy. But anyway, so like I didn't really look at him at the time because I was like, oh, it's Twilight. Like, what else could there? What could there be that's like interesting about this guy? And then I was wrong twice because obviously he's interesting, and also Kirsten Stewart's interesting, and so yeah, that means always be ready to change your mind about a performer. But yeah, so I guess I think the first time that he did a sort of like an art house movie that I paid attention to was Cosmopolis in 2012, because that was a really weird one. I can't remember if
did you see it
saw the film
when it came out.
Did we?
I don't think I did, because I only watched it for this podcast the other day.
Right.
And
yeah, I saw it like a while ago, but not when it came out. But I remember being like, this is a weird film. Why is Twilight in that? But yeah, so I guess. But when the first time that I mean, that's the thing. Like most people started to consider him because he was just everywhere. He was doing all these weird films, and you had to like pay attention. He was just grabbing your attention. But yeah, I think he's kind of a fascinating actor in the sense that because he comes from this very commercial success that he had as a quite young man. I think he was 22 in Twilight. And
well, he's 34 now, so
yeah,
2008.
22. And Kirsten Stewart was 18, which is mad to think about. They're so young. And yeah, so like there's the side of him as a famous guy where you watch all his performances thinking, oh, this is a play on him being this very popular actor that teens love or whatever. And he's made a few films about fame and like, you know, Maps to the Stars, and I guess a bit Cosmopolis is that way, where it's all about sort of almost meta consideration of like, oh, these are famous actors, they're playing characters, but it's a bit, you know, oh, you know who we are. And then he's also done roles where he sort of completely gets out of that, and you don't, when you look at him in that film, for example, I want to say The Lighthouse, when you look at him in that, you don't really think that's the guy from Twilight. He's gone. He's lucky because, I mean, he's probably worked really hard for this as well, but he's managed to move away from the always playing with who you were like 10 years ago thing, which is...
Yeah, I think this podcast is becoming like a reclaiming of Twilight in a big way, which I'm not mad about, because I do find the first film intriguing in many ways. I don't know if I would call it good, but it has something going on. And in terms of acting, what it brought to the film world is insane and very unique. And I can't really think of examples before that. I guess maybe the Harry Potter franchise kind of did a similar thing with, Daniel Radcliffe eventually doing very weird stuff on stage and in films as well. But
yeah, but I think it's kind of different because I think in a way that the Harry Potter films don't, Twilight, in the first Twilight, there's such a big focus placed on the performance of the actors, the two main actors mostly. Whereas in Harry Potter, it's more about just they play these roles and they do the things that the characters do, and they go through the motions of that. Whereas there's so much space in Twilight for the actors to act and just do acting. So obviously there's Kristen Stewart, like you just, the image springs to a mind of her just like sort of breathing shakily. I was watching like bits with the subtitles because there was noise or whatever, and she's always breathing shakily.
Is that a word, shakily?
Yeah, apparently. And there's all that space for them to just do the reactions, like when she first sees Edward, when she's scared, when she's like just talking to him. There's all these scenes in the film where it's just the two of them talking, which I think just as a concept, a scene of the two love interests just chatting about their lives and stuff is just so cute and amazing. And like that's one of the things that I think makes the movie so amazing, is that I can't believe there's a scene where they're just chatting in bed, after they like try and like fail to have sex or whatever, and then they're just chatting, and that's just so beautiful and like heartwarming in a way that I don't know if the film's even aware, but it's just incredible. I don't think you could even do that now. I just feel like, I know 2008 isn't that long ago, and I don't want to make the film sound more like groundbreaking than it was, but I really feel like there's all these things in this film that are sort of weird and quietly like daring, and that you wouldn't think they can make in a teen movie, that they could make because they were in the book, and because the book was so successful, they could just make the book, and that allowed for so many things, including the mad performances, mad in a good way, where you have like Robert Pattinson acting like she smells bad, or it looks like all these things that are like amazing to watch. Like if you're just interested in even in just from the point of view of performance, it's just amazing to have these actors like being so expressive and expressing such strange emotions that are not emotions that anyone has in the world. It's not just like, I think he's hot, or I'm attracted to you. It's like, I love you, but you're scared and you might eat me. And like, there's all these mad things that these two actors, so young, had the job of like bringing to life somehow. And I think, I do think they managed, and I think it's amazing. The film is like, I think the film is good, but not in the way, I mean, it sounds stupid because I think most old films are good, they are good in their own way. Like it's kind of, but it's good in the way that it's kind of, it's not in the real world. It's not real emotions and people and whatever. It's like sort of a higher level of like imagination. So I find it very like sort of mind opening and like just a trip to watch. It's just amazing.
Yeah. It's what we talked about with Daniel Waters when he talked about Kristen Stewart, is how she, in many ways, Twilight is a genre movie, but because it is a weird one. I mean, it's based on a book where the whole story is told from the point of view of the girl, kind of like, Rebecca, if you want. It's all like her inside mind. So because of that, there's a lot of room in the film for acting and for reacting. And yeah, Daniel was talking about how she deconstructs that. And I think in some ways, Pattinson does the same, because he had a tough job to do, which is, being a vampire. And in a way, I think throughout his career, and even now, he's, like something like almost 10 years later, no, more than 10 years later, like 14? 13 years later. Wait, it's 2021 now.
It's 2008.
Yeah, but it's 2021 now.
Yeah, oh well, all right. January.
Well, I think even now he still plays vampires in some ways. I mean, obviously he's going to play the Batman, who's a bat. But beyond that, before that, he's played a lot of people who have this sense of knowing too much and being disappointed in the world, I think. Which is essentially what a vampire is. He knows everything. He's been around. And the world sucks, and he's miserable by his condition. And I think if you look at, Cosmopolis, he's kind of like that, except he's kind of not aware. The character is not aware that he's so miserable. So Cosmopolis is this David Cronenberg movie from 2012 based on a Don DeLillo novel about a guy called Eric Packer, who's a sort of I don't know, big money guy. I don't know what he does. He's like, he handles a ton of money through the cyber world. Yeah, businessman. And he's, throughout the whole film, is being driven around in his massive sort of limousine stretcher. I think that's what they call a stretch, which is kind of ominous as a word, but anyway. And he's being driven around because he insists on getting a haircut on the day when the US president is in town. So there's a lot of traffic and there's riots starting out. And it's a film to be seen, to be believed, but it's very much about this guy being detached from the world. I mean, he's literally traveling in this sort of spaceship, kind of, and relating to people in the most unnatural way, using people and not caring about people, but at the same time asking himself some questions about what's the point of things. And again, he was still very young, and that was only 4 years after the first Twilight, which is shocking. The character is meant to be very young, but I think in his performance, there's a lot of tension, which is the same as in the first Twilight, at least. And less so in the later Twilights, because I think, as the story progresses, as he progressed as an actor, there was less tension. But I think for a big part of his career, which is still short, the early part was a lot about anxiety in a way that was constructive, in a way that's similar to Kristen Stewart, I think. But he was playing people who had sort of a knowledge and a fear, and a fear of the future, a fear of the present. And I think that's quite interesting as a presence. When you watch Cosmopolis, I wasn't struck by his performance as in like, wow, it's so controlled and brilliant, because there is something uneasy about it, which totally works with the film, because it's a very uncomfortable watch.
I think he always does it though. I think his acting style is not the controlled kind where he just looks, there are some actors, you watch them act and they're so in control of everything, and it's like a delight to watch them because they're, you just let them do their job and you're watching and you're like having an amazing time. It looks incredible. He's more,
that makes me think that's Paul Giamatti in the last scene of Cosmopolis. He's like, Paul Giamatti for me is like an actor capital A in that sense of like, he's done this for so long and he's so good, and he's character actor in a way, so he gets to do all the juicy parts, and he has to stand out without standing out in an odd way all the time, and that's why he's controlled. He's got a mastery of his craft. And in that last scene of Cosmopolis, no spoilers, but in that last scene, there's this big contrast between Pattinson's style and Giamatti's style, where he plays this guy who's actually unhinged, but because it's Giamatti, there's like a sort of great control, and like he's fully understood his character in a way that is really gratifying to watch. And I think it's a nice balance.
I think if you want to compare with Pattinson, I think the most striking example in Pattinson's filmography is The Lighthouse, where he's acting opposite Willem Dafoe. And Willem Dafoe, I think, a bit like, I want to say, Philip Seymour Hoffman as well. They're actors that have such presence that they sort of capture the lighthouse. He literally captures the light in the lighthouse. But you know what I mean?
He will not let him touch his light.
He literally like doesn't let Pattinson approach it. But like they're completely in control of the frame, of like everything that's going on, and you just watch them and the film moves around them. And I think Pattinson, his acting style is not at all that, which doesn't mean it's bad, it's just different. And he's more like someone who is always teetering on the verge of like going mad, and like sort of an unstable presence. That's why he is, I think, in Good Time, the Safdie film, because I mean he plays a really sort of wild guy in that, who's trying to help his brother get some money or something like that, and he's always just scheming and like trying to, running around doing deals, trying to convince people to do deals with him and stuff. And so he's this really unhinged presence that is uncontrollable and like can't stay still for very long.
It's funny you say that, because I read this now already iconic GQ interview that Pattinson gave, I think it was in May of 2020, during already the pandemic. And it's this interview conducted over Zoom, where at some point he tries to cook some pasta and it goes horribly wrong. I encourage everyone to read it, because I hadn't, and it's a delight. In a disgusting way, it's a delight, but it's great. And at some point, the interviewer actually talked to Dave Eggers, the director of The Lighthouse. And he said what you said very well. He said that he found that Pattinson has this paranoid quality, which is which he thinks is the reason why he was cast in Good Time, where he's got this he's like anxious, and that's why he can't stay still, and he's always doing stuff. And I also read that his process often, especially on the Lighthouse, was to, before takes, he would like just shake himself up physically, and sometimes he would like try to make himself throw up to like be in the mood, because if people haven't seen The Lighthouse, it's a great film. It's very fun. It's like a comedy pretty much to me, like a sort of psychological comedy, which is great. And as he stays in this lighthouse with Willem Dafoe, he kind of goes crazy progressively. So it makes sense that he would be more and more unhinged. And so for takes, he would try and like he would, slap his own face or like bump himself in furniture or whatever, and try to make himself throw up. And sometimes he actually threw up. And Willem Dafoe was like, "What's this?" Because Willem Dafoe is, like you say, he doesn't need to do all this stuff to be all right. And I think that tension is key to the film itself, because there's this whole competition between the two characters. And I like that. I like that he pushes himself, like you were saying, like he's managed to not be just a guy who plays with stardom, by literally wants to always be on edge and pushing himself and throwing up on set and like running around New York with his hair dyed yellow for a good time. It's an interesting way to keep doing interesting things.
I'm just wondering how he ever managed to like stay still enough to do Twilight and things like this, or like, or if he will ever be able to do something like this again, because it seems like now he's on this journey where he wants to. He seems like, if you look at his filmography and like the less obvious roles and the less big roles that he picked, I'm thinking especially of that 2018 film Damsel, which I really recommend. He seems to have like to pick roles when he has the choice, to pick roles where he plays someone who's weird, like a freak, like a weirdo. Right. And he often plays people who are just a bit like, actually not at all like the guy in The Lighthouse, but more like the guy in The Lighthouse at the end of The Lighthouse, where he's like completely lost it. More like the guy in Good Time. More like closer to actually his character in The Rover from 2014. And in The Rover, he plays someone who's it's suggested sort of mentally deficient, but sort of very very on edge and very like sort of twitchy. And if you look at like so many of his roles, he always plays like really weird people who don't stay still and have like weird opinions and have like really wide-eyed like behavior. And so whenever he plays like against that type, it's really interesting and strange. Like I want to think of, I'm thinking about High Life as well, where he's so very like mellow in a way. There's this history that he's like done some crimes and like killed some people. That's why he's in this space prison.
Actually, I reread the plot of the film, and apparently his crime is that he killed a friend of his because that friend had killed his dog, and like that's it. That's like his only crime. I mean, that's not good. He killed someone, but like he's not like a crazy, horrible. He's not as bad as the other guys on the spaceship, I think. So I think that's kind of why he's got this blasé attitude of having been, put in jail for life and more into a spaceship. So yeah, but it's you're right. It's not like a crazy, crazed person.
But there's still, I think, and that's probably why Claire Denis cast him as well, because there's still some intensity to him when you look at him, even when he's not doing anything. Because there's his eyes. He's got these really interesting eyes. I think they're like really big, like the eyelids going like that a bit. And which gives him sort of a crazy look in a good way, like really he's not like sleepy, it's like the opposite. And I think there's always this sort of tension in the frame, even when in High Life, I mean, they're convicts, they're not really doing much, they're just sort of running around in circles and just doing the same stuff every day. So there's always this sort of tension in the frame, which I think Claire Denis could very well see and could very well like use that in the film. And there's also like I want to say like a bit of like a threat almost sometimes to his energy, which especially well used, I think, recently in The Devil All the Time. So in that film from 2020, the Netflix film, he plays a mad sort of preacher but it's like a preacher like in the old style, so he talks like a preacher. So lots of people made fun of his accent at the time, which I think is very unfair, because if you watch any of his other films where he plays an American, he does like a perfect American accent. It's kind of crazy. Even in Twilight, I think he does a really good accent. In Devil All the Time, it's like a Southern story, so he does a Southern accent, which automatically, if you do that, it sounds like you're doing a funny voice, which is unfair because I don't think that's true. But also he's talking like a preacher, so he has to sound a bit weird. Like he's not talking normally. You know, when he talks normally in the film, he never talks normally because he's mad. So he's always talking like a preacher throughout the film. And in that film, he plays like a sort of threatening character who's also, you want to slap him a bit because he's so annoying and like so, he takes these airs, but he's also like a coward, which I think is like perfect for Robert Pattinson because he's got this sort of aura where he's very active and energetic and stuff, but also like he can look like sort of like a scared puppy a bit. And so it's perfect for that movie. And I feel like that film really used that really well and sort of gave him the energy to do stuff. But also I want to say Tenet, in the 2020 Christopher Nolan film, where he's also got this like edge of like, you don't know what he's going to do and you don't know how dangerous he is.
Yeah, and my feeling watching Tenet was that it was interesting because I watched Cosmopolis and then I watched Tenet and I was like, this is a different guy. I mean, there is like you say, a remnant of this fear maybe a little bit, but I just think in Tenet, it's also because he looks older, like he's older, he's more of a mature person now. Whereas in Cosmopolis, he looks super young, especially when he's got his glasses on all the time. And you're just like, this is a child in a limousine, what's going on? But I think in Tenet, he plays someone who's much more confident because, spoilers, he's the only one who actually knows what's going on, like the whole time. Even when, it's revealed to you, you don't understand it, he knows. So like, he's got the upper hand, if you want, in a positive way. He's not a villain in this one. And it's interesting because, you feel that he could do anything, because I think that's also part of the film's quality itself, is that you literally don't know what's going on and don't know what's going to happen, even though it happened already, And I think it was very good casting for that. And in that interview with GQ, Christopher Nolan says that when you talk to Robert Pattinson, he kind of plays himself down as like, I had no idea what was happening in Tenet. But apparently Christopher Nolan is like, no, he really knew. Like, he understood everything, and he's just playing you because that's how he is. Like, he likes to really push people around. And at the same time, he himself has self-doubt, which I think is why he keeps pushing himself. And that's super motivating in a way, because it's like, you can be one of the highest paid actors in Hollywood and still feel inadequate, like, all the time. And eventually feel a bit better, which is great. Like, in the interview, he explains that when he started the year, I think it was, well, I guess maybe not 2020, maybe 2019, since the movie Tenet came out in 2020. He started the year with no jobs, and he was like, what's going on? I mean, I thought it was a big deal. And so he was like, maybe, you know what? Maybe I want to make big mainstream movies again. And that's when Tenet happened. That's when he got the call for Tenet, because turns out Tenet, in a way, is like the best film for him to do at that point, because it is a big film, but it is made by one of the only sort of art directors working in mainstream, which is Christopher Nolan.
Or at least working with that budget.
Exactly. I didn't check the budget. I wanted to check. I haven't had time.
It's like a blockbuster. It's almost like an art house blockbuster. A blockbuster that no one really understands.
Exactly. Which is interesting, because that's kind of exactly where you would expect Pattinson to be at this point, because he's done all the art house, but what if he did a bigger one? And that's what he did. And I think he's really matured as an actor, and it was also really nice to see him do a British accent for once, because he's from Barnes in London.
Yeah.
Let's not forget. And I think he's progressed, and at the same time he can still go and play some insecure people in a convincing way.
Yeah, I think actually you were saying like Nolan's like, oh, he pretends he doesn't understand Tenet, but he does. I think if anyone can understand Tenet, it's Robert Pattinson, because he's so like unhinged, and like you can tell he's got like crazy ideas. I mean, when you read this interview where he's trying to make pasta in the microwave, like, like he's capable of following through Christopher Nolan's ideas of time travel. Like, he has no problems doing that, I'm sure. Like, he's probably from like another planet himself, so like he's fine. But it's interesting the way you say about how like he's sort of straddling like the difference between the world of art house and mainstream, and sort of bringing this mad art house energy to like mainstream films, because I'm really curious about what he's going to do with the Batman. And also, I told you, like, I think he plays a lot of weirdos, and I think that's like sort of one of the things that's like essential about him is that he plays weirdos. I think in Twilight, massive weirdo, very a loner guy who doesn't talk to anybody.
Not his fault.
Even as like when he actually talks to her, even just the way he behaves is like a nerd guy. He's not like, I'm a secret, I'm like Mr. Darcy and I'm really cool and I can't talk to you. No, he's like really weird and like lanky, weird guy. Even then, he doesn't have to do that. Like, I don't think that's like essential to the part, but he makes it that way, which is so much more endearing. Very interesting. But then in The Rover also, he plays like a weird guy who's like, his brother like left him for dead after a robbery or whatever, and he's trying to find him, but then he's like torn between these two things. He's called in between of all that stuff. In Damsel, he plays a guy who is who hires a preacher to, it's a Western. He hires a preacher to go with him, travel to a place where he's going to marry his wife. And he's very, very strange, and he's like, I'm going to pay you this, and he's got all these ideas about what romantic love is, and he's like really strange guy. In The Lighthouse, he's way weirder than we imagine he is. I mean, weirder, you know what I mean? Like, he's got like secrets. And then the Batman, it's like, is he going to play the Batman like that? Is he going to play Batman like he's like a weird nerd guy? Is he going to play him like, instead of like being this Christian Bale businessman who's like in control but's got like anger issues, is he going to play him more like erratic? I'm
it's
really
interesting
curious.
actually. It's interesting actually because when I watched Cosmopolis, it reminded me, by the nature of the film and the story, it reminded me a lot of American Psycho, which is, in the film version, the American Psycho is played by Christian Bale. And I think in a way, and he's Welsh, he's not British, but he's Welsh playing Americans, you know, there's this comparison as well. And he's played Batman. And I think the emphasis with the Bale version was the technology, the technical, like the technological power, the money. Whereas if you take Pattinson and you see him, for instance, in Cosmopolis, it was money, but it seemed more, it's like an updated version where it's more about the future, like the cyber world, the idea of the youth being corrupt. So I think it's interesting that he would play Batman as someone quite young, because I think Bale was older than this when he played Batman, if I remind myself.
Sure, yeah.
I'm pretty sure. And like, I think, yeah, he's probably going to play him as a very strange guy, which in a way, the Batman is a nerd. Like, he's a guy who's just staying in his house. And again, obviously, I don't want to keep going back to this, but he's a bat. Like, he's a vampire. He's the same thing. And in The Lighthouse is the same. Someone isolated in a tower. It's like this idea of isolation, high life, isolated in a spaceship. I think he could play him as a very introverted guy who expresses himself in strange ways, and also has this obviously the Batman is a good guy, supposedly he wants to fight the bad guys, so that would be interesting to see him try and do that, trying to be at the same time weird and threatening and a good guy. I think
I'm
that could be
basically
a very
imagining him
interesting...
as like his character from Good Time, but like with a cape, which I don't know how that's gonna work.
Yeah, in that GQ interview, they say a lot of time that he's a chaos agent.
Yes, exactly. That's right. It's like,
but that's kind of the Batman we need, isn't it?
Yeah, he's like so the unstable element in the frame, in the film.
In another interview, he said, I realized I wanted to be the British guy with black hair as opposed to blonde hair, because he didn't want to be in period dramas all the time, like, you know, a fancy British guy. Instead, I wanted to be like the weird one, like the dangerous one. And I think he's done that, you know. And with the Batman, it's going to be that. I think he's got his hair dyed black in the pictures I've seen. So there we go.
I don't think there's going to be much
his goal.
Movie.
No, it's probably going to be pretty dark.
Black and white.
Yeah. Tenet was grey. Tenet was very grey. He's progressing towards total darkness.
He had really
the Lighthouse was
hair
in black and white.
Tenet, though. He had these like highlights.
Yes. Yeah.
Looked fab.
Maybe it's remnants from Good Time.
Yeah. He had a bit
like, you know what, that was good.
In Tenet, he had a bit of a tan.
That's true.
Really
for a British man.
Yeah. Really like opposite of Twilight look.
But you also watched The King, where he plays a Frenchman, and I saw
that's
clips
another
of that.
weirdo. That's another like unhinged guy, like really strange. Like, he cannot play normal people really. And the only time he sort of played a normal person, I guess, was The Lighthouse, and then turns out he wasn't very normal. He had like the like secrets. Even in the I watched bits of the Queen of the Desert, the Werner Herzog film. Werner, someone Werner. And he plays a sort of explorer in this, and he's only got like 2 or 3 scenes. It's like almost a cameo appearance, but even then, like he plays like a weird guy. Like he plays like a very eccentric explorer. Even in this like very short appearance. So I was like, he just doesn't want to play standard guys. Really interesting. I think something else that needs to be mentioned about him is that, of course, he started as like sort of a romantic ideal man, heartthrob, and he does that really, really well in the 2010 film Remember Me, which it's a shame because like I don't know if you know like the big twist of that film. I don't know if I should tell people, but it's sort of famous now almost. So okay, spoiler alert, I'm gonna say what happens at the end of Remember Me.
Go for it.
Remember Me, it's like this romance with him and a girl played by Emily Raven, and it ends with 9/11. And at the end, he dies in the towers of 9/11. So, which is a shame because without this, I think the film is like quite good. Like it's not doesn't have high stakes or anything. It's just about a guy and a girl, and they have problems, and they sort of fall in love, whatever. But then it's all in this like we're all connected thing, careful like carpe diem thing, which is like not necessary. But anyway, so end of the spoiler bit. In Remember Me, Pattinson plays a guy who lives in New York, and he does a really good accent, and it's like great to see him just like I'm a New York guy and I go to university in New York, and they always talk about New York, and like he works at the Strand bookstore. It's like amazing. And he's very, 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 very charming because he plays a guy. So first of all, he's a bit depressed. He's very depressed because we find out his brother like killed himself like years ago, and he's not over it. But also he's like a weirdo, and which is really nice. It works really well in this movie because it's a sort of a romantic film where there's a meet cute with a girl, and he sort of meets her as like a bet that his friend makes, but then they eventually do fall in love and stuff. And the way the meet cute happens is that he does the classic like, hey, there's this guy over there, he's my friend, and I was thinking you could be part of this sociological experiment, and you can tell how much of an asshole he is just by looking at him. And so there's like this very cute thing, like really offbeat dialogue stuff. And because it's Robert Pattinson, it's like convincing. And you believe that he would probably pick up a girl like this. He probably wouldn't say anything normal. It's just like you almost watch the film just for him because it's so interesting the way he navigates all this like so very conventional structure. So he's not weird like the way he's in Twilight, where he just doesn't speak and looks like that or whatever. Like, no, he has like a second or third date with Emily the Raven, and then they like somehow they like throw water at each other. And when she does it, it's a bit like, oh, you're manic pixie dream girl. It's a bit not convincing. But when he does it, you're just like, he's mad Robert Pattinson stuff. It's like convincing that he would do this. And then they end up like in the bath, like sort of putting water on each other, like fighting, and you're like, what? But it works. So that's what I'm saying. I'm just saying this film, which is otherwise, I wish I hadn't seen the ending, basically. But it works almost only on his charm and on him being an offbeat guy who can do the manic pixie dream boy thing, like really well, really convincingly. It doesn't feel forced at home for him. He feels so relaxed in a way that he doesn't feel relaxed in lots of his films where he's tense. In this one, he's sort of like a sort of depressed guy who's relaxed, and he's got like really offbeat, weird ways. So it's kind of a fascinating film to watch just for that.
I think he was executive producer on this one.
Yeah.
So perhaps that was his way of trying to give himself something different. Because I think this tension, this anxiety thing is a thing that he's really built his career around for a big, long time before he maybe got the confidence, maybe just got the offers to do something different. And I think he's capable of doing both. I think that Lighthouse, in a way, is kind of a condensation of these things, because at first you see him as kind of normal but tense, and then he goes off. And that's kind of a great outlet for his style, for his performance style, where you get really to see everything he can do. And also it's not with a romantic aspect as much, you know, because I think that's the thing, you know, when he started out, especially I remember him in the Harry Potter movie, because I was like, who's this guy who's kind of hot but weird and like pale, and guess what, he became a vampire. But like, I remember that he could have become just a heartthrob, and he didn't at all, even though he's got the looks and everything. But he really pushed himself, and when you watch him in The Lighthouse, eventually you're kind of disgusted by him, and you're not, there's nothing that charming anymore. And I think he gets off on that. He said that one of his favorite actors, like inspirations, is Jack Nicholson. And I think that you can kind of see that in the roles he takes, in the challenges he imposes on himself, and the chaotic energy he brings.
Yeah, I think Jack Nicholson actually is like really interesting actor, because he can do like sort of he's been in some like low budget independent films where he was like kind of relaxed and like himself, but still a bit like edgy and stuff. And he can do A Few Good Men, and like be like very like still and like controlled and terrifying. Like he can do both. He manages to always like maintain sort of the core essence of what Jack Nicholson is in all contexts. And it feels like Pattinson is trying to do the same thing whenever he does either a commercial film or like an art house film. So we have to hope that he continues to do that. But I think he's doing well. I don't know I don't know how he makes his choices, because it must be really difficult to know whether a director is going to let him be his weird self.
But apparently he does pursue directors a lot. Like, apparently he literally just calls them every week or something. Like, he's a bit annoying. But because he's got talent, and because he does that because he cares, I think directors who have something interesting to do with him, they do like that. I mean, he got Claire Denis to cast him in a film. And actually, what you were saying earlier about how he brings the art house mentality, if you want, to the mainstream, I think he did kind of the opposite with High Life. He brought that was Claire Denis' first English-speaking film. And it's like a sci-fi movie, which is kind of his specialty, with Twilight and stuff, if you kind of sci-fi. And he made that, like, he brought her to an international level that she always was on as an art filmmaker, but he made her be the director of a sci-fi English-speaking movie. And that's great. Like, that's in a way, he really has this combination of art house and mainstream in him, in everything he does. I mean, more and more as he goes on.
I wonder if he hadn't had Twilight, if he'd ever actually been like a mainstream prospect. Because I feel like even now, when he gets cast in Tenet, like, would they cast him in Tenet if he hadn't done like a mainstream film like Twilight? It's like, how did he end up doing Twilight? I mean, he's very, very good in the film, but like, I think it goes back to what we're saying about Twilight, which is a film that asks for like performance in a way that some other teen movies probably don't. And that's why I think it's like, I'm sure that for both Kristen Stewart and him, there was a case where they had such an insane overnight success with the Twilight films, that they were like, I want to do something else. I want to like go the opposite direction. So they both did art house films. But I think it's not just like their opinion, like their like drive that made that happen. I think it's also because the roles themselves allowed them to do that, because they had to perform in such a way and like be so expressive that the expressive way they act and the very unique way they act both made them stars in themselves. Like they are themselves in the film. I mean, no one else could act the way they do in those films, basically. But also, it showed that they have like an interest in performance and acting, and like that they have a very personal style of doing things and like a very unique way of doing it. So it sort of almost makes sense that they went on to do art house films, because you're like, well, yeah, when you watch Twilight, if you ignore like the fact that it was like a worldwide success, you can be like, I can see these actors like doing other weird films and weird roles, because like you can see they've got what it takes. In a way that I don't know if that's true of other successful teen films.
Yeah, like for instance, when we were saying Harry Potter, it maybe doesn't call for the same kind of, I mean, they were much younger as well, they were child actors basically, but it doesn't really give as much room for personal interpretation, essentially, because if you got anyone else to do the Bella part, it would not be this. Like, she could have been super cute and nice, and instead she's like this awkward, like why are we watching this person kind of thing. But you, at the same time, you're obsessed. And same with him, he's like, yeah, he's beautiful, but he's also creepy as fuck. And what does he want?
And funny, he's really funny.
Yeah, as well. He's quite funny, I guess.
I think he's really funny.
As it goes on. Yeah?
The
When?
character, like, I don't know, like, he's like the way he like, there's a really funny bit in Twilight that I totally didn't remember, where they're in the lab, you know, in the school, like they're doing some lab stuff, and he's asking about the weather, and it's raining, and she's like, oh, anything wet, anything wet and I don't like, and wet and cold
Wet
I
and
don't
cold.
like. And he laughs, and I'm like, is this just a joke about his like penis? I was like, what? How is this in the film? Like, what the fuck? What is happening? And he laughs and stuff. And like, and in all the other scenes, like, I really like the scene where he brings her to his house, and like, oh, you can come over, and like all his family's there, like cooking a meal for the first time because we don't eat, and nothing bad happens. You know, they just hang out, and he just shows her stuff in the house, and he's like a bit awkward about stuff. He's like, oh yeah, like we do this. He has all the hats from graduation because he's graduated like 200 times or whatever, and he's like, oh yeah, it's a private joke and stuff. And just the way he says all those things is just really funny. Like, I just find him very funny. Like, he's not trying to be like a charming, like, oh, I'm smiling or whatever, like I'm the guy who's got like a lovely smile or what. It's not like I'm trying to think, like, there are boys like this that when you watch a film, you're like, oh my god, he's like the ideal boy, like he's so cute, this is like a fantasy, he's bringing me to his house. I was like, no, he's like a guy in his house, you know. It's just a guy, like he's like a nerd, like he's like, I'm a bit awkward because you're in my house and I like you know, he's not like cool, he's not cool.
Yeah,
exactly. That's
yeah.
what I mean. And I think it's really funny, and like it sort of like brings like a really interesting energy to this film that's otherwise like a pure fantasy vampire thing, you know.
Yeah,
it's like,
no,
it's like
I
not
see what
like
you mean.
50 Shades, you know. 50 Shades,
yeah,
when she goes to his like office or like his house, it's like, oh my god, like this is crazy, like the tension is unbearable, like this man is in control, he's so sexy, he's so cool. Like, this is like, it's not like that. It's not. He's like very teen. He's a teen. He's not cool, which I think is so much more interesting, and so much like it's amazing that it's in I just think it's crazy that the film, because it's like a very horny story. Like, I mean, he's just very horny for her. That's it. Like, he loves her so much, he might kill her. You know, it's crazy. And I love that it's counterbalanced by like this sort of nerdy attitude that they've got because they're so young and they're so cute.
And I think that's interesting, the comparison with the 50 Shades saga, because it is obviously inspired by Twilight, right? That's the whole story. But also, I was thinking about that earlier when you said that they have, in the Twilight saga, they have room to act, whereas it feels like 50 Shades is so controlled and so like they are such types that they don't have room to be themselves.
I feel like, actually, I think that's true, largely true, but I feel like Dakota Johnson does amazing work with the limited space she's given. I think she manages to do stuff.
But that's the thing, like, even when she does good work, it still feels so cramped and so limited compared to what K-Stu can do in all the films, where there's so many shots on her just like reacting to things weirdly, like, or like, it's like, what is she doing? Whereas Dakota Johnson, that feels more rare, and I think they started to include more of that as the saga went along, because I have seen them, all of them, and that was a clever move. And the idea that giving room to actors to be human, even in the most fantastical story, that's the key. And I think that's something that, you know, with all those Netflix teen comedies that are coming up, like that are popping up now, that's something that they are missing a lot, because they cast guys, like you were saying, that are like boyfriend material. They're like hot and beautiful and charming, but they don't have anything to offer. They don't have anything personal. They are just these types, and it feels like such a miscalculation. Because you have the Twilight recipe, which is put some people, make them be weird together in a human way, and everybody will. Because I think the idea, when you leave room for actors to do stuff, it also leaves room for the audience to watch and like fill the gaps for themselves, imagine what this means, think about their personalities, the characters' personalities, reflect back to themselves in a way that when you watch the first 50 Shades movie, you don't get that. It's all about the house and the room and the cars and the money, and there's no human element anymore.
Also, when you include this, what you call like human elements, where it's just people being a bit weird and like off script in a way, I feel like it's also like a way to like include the viewer, just in the sense that it's like being aware that there's a viewer there who's like knows. It's not necessarily like a self-aware thing. It's not say like, oh, my film is just a film. It's also like just it's like giving something for the viewer to like, enjoy that's like not just a story, you know, like that's like just I don't know, it's hard to explain, but you know, like there's
people
like
in space.
Yeah, people being people being, what did you say?
People in space.
People in space. You know what I mean? Like people being people being like more than just saying the lines, more than just like acting scared or happy, you know, like doing something that you can see, that you can recognize, that like sort of interpolates you in a different way than just watching a story unfold.
And I think Pattinson has pursued these roles even in Tenet, which usually I was worried that Tenet would be so cold, and it is in some ways, but I think every time Pattinson is on screen, there's always like these weird jokes they say, or like when he tries to explain the physics of the situation to the main character, the protagonist, it's like he can't help but be like, is your head hurting yet? Like, you know, it's like there's touches of humanity there, and Pattinson makes them human because he's got this great confidence in that film that is so unusual for me. I mean, I'm not used to seeing that way.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it feels lived in and authentic. And he's got that room to do that. Even at the end, spoilers, but like when he's like, for me, this is the end of a beautiful friendship because like time and stuff. Yeah. Like he says that in a way that's very funny because I mean, it's a stupid line.
The beginning of a beautiful friendship, no?
No, I think this is the end right. Because there's his end.
For the guy is the beginning and for him is the end.
Exactly. Like that's obviously a reference to Casablanca, which is like, okay. But he says that in a very funny way because it is funny. And I like that Christopher Nolan allowed for that because he can be so kind of mechanical, obviously, because his whole point is like pyrotechnics in a way. But he managed to give that to the actors, and that made it so much more interesting.
Yeah, I think that's one reason I like Tenet so much compared to some of his other films, is that he actually has managed to sort of integrate these things that are like sort of funny and like sort of almost self-aware about how everything is like insane that he's doing in a way that he hasn't really, I don't think he's really succeeded doing that before. Like I know in Inception there were some jokes, but I didn't feel like they worked at all. I thought they were like quite really cringe. But maybe you're right. Maybe I think like Pattinson is one reason why it works because he's weird himself. He's like the film. He's like weird and he knows it. And he's like, oh, this is a bit weird.
Yeah, it's like Pattinson is always threatening to break the spell, or actually by doing that, he keeps it alive and he keeps you engaged. And that's kind of what you did today.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Did I do that?
I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know what the conversation was going.
On your toes?
Absolutely, as always.
That's a great compliment.
I mean, I didn't know what film we were going to talk about next. We went back talking about some because Pattinson, you know, energy, Pattinson, chaotic energy.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
We adapted the structure to the subject.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of You Gotta Act. If you wish to know in advance who our next guest will be and ask them a question, become a friend of You Gotta Act on Patreon. See you next time.